Welcome to Unmuted, and you're really going to enjoy this session today. Let me start by asking you a question. What is it that is important to you, to each one of us individually, as parents, as grandparents, as those that love and take care of children? And for me, safety, security, knowing that children are well tended, that they are going to be safe from the bad guys, if you will, whether it is in the physical or the virtual space. And at most schools, children must receive permission from their parents to take an aspirin or an Advil. However, California and other blue states are attempting to pass laws that would allow children experiencing gender dysphoria to receive puberty blockers from their doctors without parental consent. That's right, life-altering puberty blockers, receiving them without parental consent. So my next guest, who you know from Daily Wire, is here to give us his opinion on the matter, because this is an issue that he is doing a deep dive into this. So welcome, Matt Walsh, to Unmuted.
Thank you, Sandra, for having me.
Yes, listen, it is so great to have you. And for those that are not following this issue as closely as you and I have, can you give us an overview of how the left is pushing children to question their gender, and then how is this playing out in classrooms, in hospitals, doctors' offices, and in homes across the country?
Yeah, well, you pointed out right there a few of the really important avenues. So this is something that's happening through multiple institutions, and we have to. This is part of the consequence of living in a culture that has where almost all of our most powerful institutions have been ideologically captured by the left, and what that means is that children are at a massive disadvantage because they go to school. If they go to public school, then they're there for 6 or 7 hours a day, 5 days a week, 9 months a year for 12 or 13 years, and during that time, they're getting it from multiple directions, because on one hand, they've got the school, the administration, the lesson plans that are often the curriculum that is often designed to engender this intense confusion about biological sex, about their identity. They're also operating every day in a peer culture where there's a lot of peer pressure also. It can be really shocking to people that grew up in a different era, that for a lot of kids today, it's sort of, it's not considered cool to be what they would call quote unquote cisgender, just sort of like a normal person who identifies as what you are. There's a lot of pressure to come up with some new kind of identity. And that's what they're existing in every day. And then they leave school, but they don't really leave that cloud, because now it follows them around on social media. Social media is a delivery mechanism for this social contagion of gender ideology.
Well, you're right about that. I have to ask you, what led you to look at this issue and to really do a deep dive into all the issues around transgender and gender dysphoria and polygender, fluid gender? Talk about that for a moment.
Well, like many other people, I noticed a few years ago that this concept is starting to take hold of our society, and I think I sort of clued on to it when it was a little bit earlier on in the process, but I looked around and saw that all of a sudden it seemed like people had a confusion about these really fundamental concepts, like what is a man, what is a woman, and then I became interested in kind of where did that start, where did it come from, how are these ideas getting out into the public, why is everybody so confused? These are questions I think everyone's asking themselves now, and questions that I ask myself. And the thing is, when you look into it and you get, as you say, you do a deep dive into it, you realize that actually, although it seems like this all started 5 years ago, it actually goes back decades. And gender ideology as a concept is kind of seeded into our institutions over the course of decades. And then about 5 or 6 years ago is when it seemed to sort of explode onto the scene, you know, on a kind of at a popular level, I suppose.
Yeah. And recently, you've made headlines because of exposing some video from Vanderbilt University Medical Center. And in this video, you have physicians talking about how profitable the transgender surgeries can be. So, how did you come about with doing this investigation? What led you to Vanderbilt, and what has transpired with the video?
Yeah, this is not just Vanderbilt. You know, we've noticed that there are children's hospitals, of course, all across the country that are doing what they would call gender affirmation care, which is one big euphemism. It's a euphemism for drugging kids, giving them irreversible hormone drugs and chemical castration drugs, which is what they call puberty blockers, and also performing irreversible surgeries on them. And this is happening in children's hospitals and medical clinics all across the country. I live here in Nashville, so Vanderbilt's right down the street. I became curious about like what's happening at Vanderbilt, and we discovered as we looked into it that, you know, it's the same sort of thing, but what we were able to find were a series of videos that had originally been published by Vanderbilt themselves, and many of these videos have been sort of sitting out there in the ether of cyberspace for years now, and nobody really noticed. And as we looked at the videos, a story began to unfold, and we found one video of a doctor explaining why Vanderbilt decided to get into the transgender care business in the first place. And she says that among other reasons, like in large part, they got into it because it's very profitable. And she talks about how much money there is to be made on these surgeries. And the interesting thing is that one of the reasons why the surgeries are so profitable to the hospital is that they're labor intensive, but also because they require a lot of follow-up. So what does that mean? It means that when they perform these surgeries on someone, they turn them into a patient for life. And that's a lot of money for them. And so that's why they got into it, by their own admission. We found other videos where they, you know, with other people at Vanderbilt telling staff that it would be problematic, quote unquote, for them to have a conscientious objection to engaging in or to participating in these surgeries. Religious, you know, if they exercise their religious liberty, you know, that could be problematic, they said. So there's this pressure apparently happening at Vanderbilt against the staff saying, you have to participate in this. Then you go down the line and you find that, you know, eventually they got into performing these surgeries on minors. And we have video that proves that they perform double mastectomies on minor girls. We have one video where they say they stipulate 16-year-old girls are getting double mastectomies in an effort to, you know, turn into boys. It's horrific stuff.
Yes, it is. And recently, I've sent a letter over to the FDA asking them about puberty blockers or drugs that are used as puberty blockers, things that may be being used off-label and may not have been approved for minors. And I want to know what kind of clinical trials that they have done, how they know that they're safe, if they're looking at the long-term effects of this. So what have you found out about the use of these drugs as puberty blockers?
Yeah, I'm so glad you sent that letter, because even if the FDA doesn't, I certainly hope they act on it, but even if they don't, it at least has the effect of letting people know that, oh, by the way, these drugs, for the way they're being used, is not approved by the FDA. There's been very little research done into it. You said off-label, and that's a key point here, because these drugs were made for one purpose and are now being used for an entirely different purpose, and there's very little study that's been done to prove that the purpose they're being used for now is safe. One drug in particular we could talk about is Lupron, and that was originally a cancer drug for men with prostate cancer, but it has also been used. There have been usages where it's been used as a chemical castration drug for sex offenders in some states. So this is an actual, by definition, this is a chemical castration drug. That's the effect that it has. And now they give it to kids. And they say puberty blocker because what it's supposed to do, the way they sell it, is that it just, well, if a child is coming up to the phase of puberty, then you could give them the drug and it blocks it, it holds it off, pauses it, and then they can resume puberty at some other time. And all the effects are reversible. There are no long-term effects at all, no long-term harm. All of that is a lie. The body just doesn't work that way. You can't just put a pause on the natural development of the body without there being serious consequences. And there are serious consequences here. But we're only beginning to figure out what those consequences are because we've never used drugs like this on kids before for this reason. And so this current generation of kids, they are the guinea pig generation. And they aren't being told that they're used as guinea pigs, but that's what's happening.
And to me, that is just so incredibly sad because, as you have pointed out, this is something that changes their life forever. And the trajectory for them is going to be different. And I know that this is going to be of concern to parents who are watching this unmuted, and they're going to want to say, what can I do to protect my child? So to parents that are watching this, what is your advice to them? What have you found out about questions they need to be asking teachers, people that are advisors to their children, their pediatrician? Where do they go?
Yeah, it seems like a daunting task because we live in a society that's totally enthralled to this madness. And as a parent, I know as a parent of 4 kids myself too on the way, that it feels sort of overwhelming how you're supposed to protect your kids from it. There are things that you can do. For one thing, what I would certainly recommend is that you don't just give your kid a smartphone with internet access that they can with unfettered access to the internet, where they can access all these sites and everything where these ideas are promulgated, because as I said, social media is a delivery mechanism for the social contagion of gender ideology, and so you have to put a wall between that and your kid, insulate them from it to the extent that you can. So that's one thing we should be doing. If you do send your kid to public school, then you need to be very involved at school board meetings, PTA. I mean, you need to be asking questions about what kids are being taught. Talk to your kid every day after school to find out what they were taught. And this is, unfortunately, this is a certain amount of suspicion we have to bring into every situation now, because doctors, therapists, counselors, it's not that you can't bring your kid to any of those places, but you have to realize that this ideology is present everywhere. And so you have to ask questions also, and just keep a watchful eye. And then also on the political end of it, no matter where you live, you should be in touch with your state legislators and asking them, you know, are you gonna, why have there not been laws passed yet to prevent this from happening to kids in our state? And so I think there are many different avenues you could be exploring as a parent. We should be doing all of that.
And I know that our unmuted viewers are going to want to keep up with you, and they will find you on Twitter at Matt Walsh Blog. And we thank you for the good work that you're doing, and thank you for joining us today on Unmuted. And for our audience, you will always find me on social media at Marsha Blackburn. Matt, thank you for the great work you're doing. Keep it up.
Thank you, Senator. Appreciate it.